My name is Dr. Brennan Calloway. I'm 46 years old. Board-certified OB/GYN at Desert Ridge Medical Center in North Phoenix. I have privileges at 2 hospitals and a practice I spent 15 years building from nothing. I have delivered over 2,000 babies in this city. I know the human body the way a pilot knows weather, not just the patterns, but the warning signs most people never learn to read. And on a Tuesday morning in October, my wife stood in our kitchen with her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea and told me she was pregnant. She smiled when she said it. That slow, careful smile, the one she used when she was managing a situation instead of living in it. The kind that never quite travels to the eyes. I had seen that smile before, across dinner tables and charity events, turned on donors and difficult clients. It was her professional smile. Her armor smile. She was wearing it in our kitchen. With me. I stood there holding my coffee and I did the math. In my profession, you do that automatically. It's not a choice, it's reflex. Gestational timelines, conception windows, ovulation cycles, these are the coordinates of my workday. She said 5, maybe 6 weeks along. That put conception in early to mid-September. I stood there and I smiled back. That's incredible, I said. We should schedule an ultrasound. She agreed. She reached out and touched my arm. The morning light came through the kitchen window and fell across the lemon tree she'd planted in the backyard that first spring after we moved in. Everything looked exactly like a life. But here's the thing Lacey didn't know. The thing she had no way of knowing, because I hadn't told her yet, because I was still figuring out how to say it, and then didn't, because by the time I needed to, everything had already changed. In late July, I had a vasectomy. Let me take you back 8 months. Lacey and I had met 11 years ago at a fundraiser in downtown Phoenix. She was 31, working as a senior event coordinator for a high-end hospitality company. She was extraordinary at it, the kind of woman who could walk into a room full of surgeons and hospital administrators and make every single one of them feel like the most important person she'd ever met. I stood at the altar at the Arizona Biltmore 2 years later and genuinely believed I was the luckiest man in the building. For 7 years, we were solid. Not perfect, nobody is, but solid. I worked long hours. She traveled for destination weddings, corporate retreats, galas. We had a rhythm. A life. A home in Arcadia with a pool and that lemon tree. The cracks came the way they always do. Slowly. Quietly. And then a little faster. About 2 years ago, Lacey's social circle shifted. She joined the board of a charity called the Camelback Women's Foundation and fell in with a group of wealthy Phoenix women, wives of developers and executives, women who went to Scottsdale restaurants where the wine list started at what most people paid for rent. The one who became Lacey's closest friend was a woman named Diane Forsythe. Old money. Poised. Married to Greg Forsythe, who ran a commercial real estate empire with offices in Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Dallas. Greg was the kind of man who discussed his portfolio the way other men discussed the weather. Casual. Comfortable. Like success was simply the climate he lived in. I didn't feel threatened by Greg Forsythe. I felt, if anything, slightly bored by him. That was my first mistake. In February, Diane proposed a girls' trip. A long weekend in San Diego, 6 women from the Camelback board, the Pendry Hotel in downtown. Rooftop pools. Craft cocktails. The kind of environment designed to make ordinary lives feel too small. Lacey was excited in a way that was almost too bright. She showed me the hotel website on her phone. She asked if a new dress for the trip was reasonable. I said yes. I drove her to Sky Harbor myself and kissed her at the departures drop-off. They left on a Thursday. They came back on a Sunday. Lacey walked in tan and relaxed, hugged me, told me she'd missed me, poured a glass of water, went upstairs to unpack. And that was that. Until 3 weeks later, when I ran into Dr. Paula Whitfield, a cardiologist whose husband played poker with Greg Forsythe, and she mentioned in passing, completely casually, the way people mention things they assume you already know. Funny coincidence, Greg was in San Diego that same weekend. The elevator doors opened. She got off. I rode up 2 extra floors I didn't need. I went back to my office and sat at my desk for a long time. I thought about every moment since Lacey had come home from that trip. The slight quiet. The phone she angled away. The dinners she didn't normally make. The careful attentiveness I had read as post-vacation presents. I was reading it differently now. I'm a physician. I don't make diagnoses on intuition. I don't act before I have data. So I didn't confront Lacey. I didn't call Greg Forsythe. I didn't do anything dramatic. I started paying attention. 3 weeks of observation, text messages angled away from me, a car charger in her bag for a phone I didn't recognize, a Wednesday dinner with a vendor from work whose details she slightly misremembered a week later. Small things. Individually nothing. Together, a mosaic. I also called the Pendry Hotel in San Diego. I framed it as a billing inquiry on a reservation under the Forsythe name. The woman at the front desk was helpful. She confirmed the reservation. She mentioned, without being asked, that the suite had accommodated 2 guests. 2 guests. I sat in the parking garage beneath Desert Ridge for 17 minutes after I made that call. Then I went upstairs and delivered a baby. Because that was what I was scheduled to do. And the baby didn't care about my personal life. That was 6 weeks before the Tuesday morning in October. 6 weeks of knowing, or near enough knowing, while continuing to share a house, share a bed, share Sunday mornings and grocery runs and all the small domestic rhythms of a life that was quietly ending. 6 weeks of sitting with a sealed envelope in a drawer, waiting. The vasectomy had happened in July, quietly. My own physician and I had discussed it during a routine review. We had talked over the years, Lacey and I, about children, never pushing hard in either direction. As I got older, I had made peace with the idea that we wouldn't. I thought she felt the same. She'd never pressed it. I made the decision. I scheduled the procedure. I was going to tell her when the moment felt right. And then I found out about San Diego. And I said nothing. I let it sit there. The sealed envelope. Waiting. When Lacey told me in October that she was pregnant, I understood immediately and completely what I was looking at. I didn't need a second opinion. I didn't need a consultation. I stood in my kitchen with my coffee and I did the math, and the math told me everything I needed to know. She had been with someone else. The child was not mine. And she was either betting that I wouldn't know, or betting that trust would make me not ask. 15 years of trust. Used against me like a tool. I smiled at her. I asked how far along she thought she was. Then I went to work. That afternoon, I called an attorney named Shelby Hartman. My colleague Rowan Decker had used her for a complicated property dispute 2 years prior. Thorough. Discreet. Exactly what I needed. I explained my situation in broad strokes. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Dr. Calloway, do you have documentation of the vasectomy? I told her I had all of it. Procedure records, follow-up confirmation of successful outcome. Everything. Good. Then the timeline will be medically verifiable. That's important. We talked for 40 minutes. She was precise and procedural. She outlined the dissolution process, Arizona's community property laws, what I would need to establish and when. I left the conversation with a clear picture of my next 6 weeks. Lacey, meanwhile, was planning. I could see it in the way she moved through our days. Softer. More present. She suggested dinner at a restaurant in downtown Scottsdale we hadn't been to in 2 years. I said yes. We went. I sat across from her and talked about her sister's upcoming visit and water conservation in the valley and whether we should repaint the exterior of the house before summer. She reached across the table and held my hand. I feel really good about this, she said. I looked at her hand over mine. At the ring I had put on her finger in the garden at the Arizona Biltmore. Me too, I said. The call from Diane Forsythe came on a Thursday afternoon in the third week after Lacey told me. Her voice was tight. Controlled the way voices get when they are very close to not being controlled at all. I found out about Greg. About San Diego. About all of it. We met at a coffee shop on Camelback Road the following morning. She was there before me, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee she wasn't drinking, hands flat on the table in front of her. Diane Forsythe had always struck me as architecturally composed. Sitting across from me that morning, she looked like a building that had lost its load-bearing walls. She had found messages on Greg's phone. She didn't say how. The messages made clear that San Diego had been planned. That there had been other times and other places before San Diego. 8 months of it, as it turned out. Months that had started well before the girls' trip, which had apparently been a watershed, a step from covert to something more openly real. I told her what I knew. What I'd found. What I hadn't yet told Lacey. Diane stared at me. Lacey is pregnant, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She told me 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed was very long. Greg doesn't know yet. Or if he does, he hasn't told me. He's been saying it was nothing. He's been doing what men do when they get caught. We talked for 2 hours. Neither of us cried. We were two people in shock doing a reasonable impression of people who were not in shock. When we left, she stopped at the door. When are you going to tell Lacey you know? Soon, I said. I'm going to tell Greg tonight. I think you should know that. Greg Forsythe called my cell phone that same Saturday afternoon while Lacey was at yoga. I picked up. He said he thought we should talk. I said I agreed. His voice had that quality of a man who controls rooms and deals and conversations, realizing he no longer controls this one, trying to find his footing and not finding it. Brennan. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. I don't need your apology, I said. I need clarity about one thing. What? The pregnancy. Are you aware of it? A pause that lasted exactly a beat too long. Lacey mentioned it to me this week. She had told him. Before she had fully committed to the story she was presenting to me, she had told him. She had been managing both of us simultaneously. Then you should know, I said, that there are medical realities that will come to light in the course of what happens next. I want you to be prepared for that. He started to say something. I told him any further communication should go through my attorney. Then I ended the call. I went inside and started making dinner. Lacey came home 40 minutes later, hair damp from yoga, carrying that particular brightness she had after a workout. She kissed my cheek. She asked what I was making. Normal. Everything completely normal. I thought about the lemon tree in the backyard. Not yet, I thought. Not yet. The conversation with Lacey happened on a Sunday morning 2 weeks later. I had planned it, not scripted it, I'm not that kind of person, but planned it. I knew what I needed to say and in what order. I had spoken with Shelby twice more. I had all the documentation I needed. Lacey was at the kitchen table with her tea. The Sunday morning light was coming through the sliding door that opened to the backyard, and the lemon tree was visible from where she sat. She was reading something on her phone. I sat down across from her with my coffee. She looked up and smiled. Can I talk to you about something? The smile didn't leave her face immediately. It took 2 or 3 seconds to process that something in my tone wasn't right. It faded the way a signal fades when you drive out of range, not all at once, just gradually, until it's gone. What about it? She said. I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me honestly. She set down her phone. Wrapped both hands around her mug. Lacey. Whose baby is it? The freeze happened exactly the way I expected it to. I've seen that particular stillness before, in patients who've just received information their bodies haven't processed yet, in people running calculations at high speed while their exterior does its best to appear normal. What are you talking about? Her voice was carefully, precisely even. I'm an OBGYN, I said. I know how to read a timeline. And I had a vasectomy in July. Which means the baby you're carrying is not mine. The color left her face completely. Like a light switching off. She didn't speak. I watched her try to find a version of this conversation that led somewhere survivable. She came up empty. I've already spoken with an attorney, I said. Shelby Hartman's office. I've also had a conversation with Diane Forsythe, who has been aware of the situation for several weeks. Lacey set her mug down on the table. Her hands were trembling, not dramatically, but visibly. Brennan. Her voice broke on my name. Just slightly. One clean fracture. I'm not going to do this as a confrontation, I said. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, and I'm going to ask you to respond with honesty. Because I think we've both earned at least that much. She nodded. A very small nod. We are going to dissolve this marriage. Shelby has started the paperwork. Arizona is a community property state, so the process will be straightforward. I'm not going to make this ugly. What I want is to understand how we got here. A long silence. Outside, a mockingbird started its routine in the lemon tree. How long? I asked. She looked at her hands. 8 months. 8 months. That was before San Diego. San Diego had been a step, not a beginning. Did you love him? She looked up. Her eyes were wet, but she was holding it by sheer will. I thought I did. I think I was confused about what I was feeling. And now? He ended it. After Diane found out, he ended it and told me I was on my own. Greg Forsythe, the man with the perfectly tailored suit and the casual relationship to success, had cut and run the moment his own world was threatened. I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as grief with no specific target. Not for her. Not for myself. For all of it. For the lemon tree. For the Arizona Biltmore. For every ordinary Sunday morning that had existed before this one, and would never exist in quite the same way again. I will not stay in this marriage, I said. That is not something I'm open to discussing. She didn't argue. I think some part of her had known, from the moment I sat down, that there was no argument to make. I stood up. I took my coffee to my office. I had patient notes to review because Monday was coming regardless of what had just happened in my kitchen, because that was the nature of this work, and for the first time in months, I was grateful for it. The dissolution was filed in November. By December I was in a rental house in the Biltmore area, in a quiet neighborhood with mature trees, beginning the work of building something that was entirely mine. Diane Forsythe filed for divorce the same week. Greg, last I heard, was contesting the asset division. I suspected he would find Diane more formidable than anticipated. She was the kind of woman who had spent years appearing pliant while being, underneath, extremely precise. Lacey had the baby in the spring. A girl. I know this only because my attorney informed me as a procedural matter. I did not send a card. I did not reach out. There are doors that once closed don't need to be reopened. Last month, a third-year resident named Kelsey came to my office. She'd heard, the way people in hospitals always eventually hear things, some version of what had happened to me this past year. She wasn't asking for details. She asked something simpler. How do you keep going when the ground drops out from under you? I thought about it. You do your work, I said. Not because the work will fix what's broken, it won't. But because the work reminds you who you actually are, separate from whatever is currently falling apart. The work is honest in a way that everything else sometimes isn't. And on the days when you can't figure out who you are outside of the wreckage, you can at least figure out who you are in the room with a patient who needs you. And that's enough to get through the day. Most of the time, getting through the day is enough. She nodded. She went back to her rounds. I turned back to my charts. Outside, through the window of my office, Phoenix was doing what Phoenix does, blazing and massive and completely indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath it. The saguaros on the horizon had survived droughts and floods and extremes that would flatten most things. There is something stabilizing about that, if you let yourself feel it. I let myself feel it. My name is Dr. Brennan Calloway. I am 46 years old. 11 months ago, my wife told me she was pregnant with another man's child and believed I wouldn't know the difference. She was wrong. Because the truth, in medicine and in life, is not something you can successfully manage around. It finds its way out. The ground drops out from under you. And then, if you're paying attention, if you're willing to do the hard, unglamorous work of building something new, you find out what was underneath all along. Sometimes it's more solid than you thought. Sometimes it's exactly what you needed to find.